Oh yeah, here we go. I think this is where I ended it, yes. Oh, you're back. Oh dear, that's a lot. Lady Adelaide exclaimed as she peeked into my basket, which was full of strawberries. Now you can finally make jam, she added, with a cute wink. Even Buddy's tail was wagging excitedly. Ever since I had started picking strawberries, I'd been saying I would make jam. I gave the strawberries a rinse in the front garden sink by the kitchen, removing all the soil and whatever else. I had never washed the strawberries I bought at the supermarket. I'd been told by a girl who worked in a patissier not to do so. She had said that if they had been grown outside, I should wash off any visible dirt or grass, but most strawberries were cleaned before being sold, so it was fine to use them as they were. And besides, the minerals in the water weren't good for the strawberries. The strawberries could be sterilized by boiling them, and it was easy to remove any scum that floated to the surface. Once the strawberries were clean, I gently wrapped them in cloth to absorb the excess water, then I peeled off the damaged parts with a small fruit knife, and cut the bigger ones into halves or quarters before putting them onto a bowl. Next, I weighed the strawberries, not including the bowl. For sugar, I would use granulated sugar or baker's sugar in the past. Granulated sugar gives the jam a refreshing taste and color, whereas baker's sugar adds a lot of depth to the sweetness. I had often used baker's sugar when it had been featured in special sales at the supermarket. The amount of sugar needed was based on the number of strawberries, so I usually divided the weight of the strawberries by 2 and then put that much sugar in. I feel like this can vary from person to person, though. Jam was originally a way of preserving food, so sugar was a must. In fact, I had once made jam using only a third of the weight of the strawberries and sugar. It had been good for being able to taste the fruit more directly, but it hadn't kept for very long, even in the fridge, and it wasn't that sweet, so I ended up using it all up at once rather than storing it. I went back to the original recipe the next season. If you're worried about calories, then I'd just be mindful of how much jam you use. I personally prefer to have sweet things in small doses anyway. You can put it in tea in place of sugar, and it goes well with yogurt. Yeah, it's pretty nice. So that's why the sugar always had to be half the weight of the strawberries. It was an ironclad rule for me. I then put the strawberries and sugar together in a bowl, covered the bowl, and left it alone to set. Once on cool days, you don't have to worry about it spoiling, so it's okay to leave it out overnight. Once the sugar had soaked up to the water from the strawberries, the mixture was ready to be boiled. If you're using an enamel or stainless steel pan, you could put the sugar and strawberries in right away, let the mixture melt, then cook it that way. Put the jam in this, Lady Adelaide said as she took out a copper pan. It's subdued but polished finish gleaming. I had always wanted a copper pan, and I still didn't know what kinds of metals were available in this world, but to me, this was a copper pan. It made me grin. This is too wonderful, making jams with the strawberries I had harvested from the garden in a copper pan. I'm living such a glamorous, relaxed life. I had never been interested in this sort of thing when I had seen it in magazines and so on. It had never felt real. The fields and houses all looked like they only existed for show, and it may be rude to say it, but it just reeked of lies. Real farm life was dirty and made it hard to keep on top of relationships. Real farmers were incredibly busy and didn't have a lot of spare time, so their houses were filled with utilitarian plastic tools. They didn't have sneakers in their entryways. They had boots coated in mud. They favored cleaning products that could get dirt out rather than prioritizing eco-friendliness, or at least that was my impression of the reality of farm life. Well, it's a wide world out there, so there's probably are people somewhere leading a stylishly relaxing farm life. It seemed farming and crafting things by hand weren't popular in this world either. Lady Adelaide often said she was behind the times or expressed regret that she didn't have any handy magical devices around. If I were to talk about Lady Adelaide's house in Japan terms, it seems like it was stuck in the early years of the Showa period, so it was pretty old-fashioned. She didn't have a rice cooker or a water boiler. You had to get your water manually from a pump, and while there was electricity, they only used lamps. The toilet had a septic tank, and most cleaning was done with a broom and dustcloth. It seemed the young ladies in the village weren't very fond of this way of life. But I don't mind. Absolutely zero problems for me. I had never really used a rice cooker to begin with. My brother had given me a small hand-me-down one, but I had never been able to make rice well with it. Good rice cookers were designed for families and were surprisingly expensive. I wouldn't be able to cook for myself every day anyway, so I used to make rice in a pot on the stove. Rice is delicious that way. If you take out the time it takes to clean it, you can have it ready in 20 minutes. Since I was so close to my grandmother, I was used to cleaning with an old brush and broom, so I'm good on that front. Or rather, I had no confidence I'd be able to use a magical cleaning device, since I couldn't even use magic. It seemed devices like that were made so anyone could use them, but if anything went wrong, I wouldn't be able to handle it, so they were no good. As a result, it didn't take me long to get accustomed to things. After all, I'm fine with dirt and bugs. I'm not particularly cute or girly, am I? That's why I'm single, huh? I mean, it's fine, but... I put the jam bowl to one side in the kitchen and started preparations for lunch. Lady Adelaide usually ate a really late lunch like a German cold dinner. She had cheese or fruit on small slices of bread along with something to drink. There were times when she didn't even have bread. At first, after I had arrived, she prepared actual lunches to be mindful of what I was used to, but once I found out she didn't typically have lunches like that, she went back to her usual habits. Doing extra work like that would go against the benefits of the whole living together thing if I interrupted her routine. I didn't think lunch was that important anyway, and besides, I had way more things I wanted or needed to do during the day. So I prepared tea alongside her simple lunch and grabbed a bell that was on the kitchen. It was like something out of a movie when the master of a house used a bell to call his butler. It was small gold and decorated with a lily of the valley pattern. Even if I just put it down somewhere, it looked like it could easily have been part of the decor. Lady Adelaide had given it to me so I could call for people when needed because I couldn't speak. She had told me I could take it with me wherever I went, but I usually just kept it in the kitchen. Yes, I was mostly always in the kitchen anyway. I rang the bell and it gave off a small dingling sound. Lady Adelaide called out in response, then came in with Buddy, and we smiled as we both clapped our hands together as if to say, "Let's eat." Once I finished cleaning up after lunch, I quickly did some weeding by the entryway before checking on the bowl of strawberries. The sugar was perfectly gooey, as I thought ripe strawberries were perfect for this. It's time to boil them. It shouldn't take long. The key was to use an extremely deep pot and boil it over a high heat flame so nothing gets stuck to the bottom. Although the mansion didn't have many magical tools in general, there were a lot in the kitchen. For example, there was a spark stick stove. I would say that spark sticks were something special. Only magic users would ever be able to recognize or use, but they didn't seem to be. They were basically chopsticks. Their length and feel were just like chopsticks. As for the stove underneath, the trivet lay a donut-shaped black stone. Inside that stone was a round red stone that circled around the hole in the middle of the donut. If you spun the spark stick just one around, the fire would light. You could control the heat and turn it off using a switch at the front of the stove. I had no idea how it worked or even what fueled it, but I could at least use these kinds of magical tools. This type of style of stove seemed old-fashioned too. Apparently you didn't need the spark sticks for newer versions. I didn't mind doing it though, so it worked out fine. I continued to stir the strawberries over high heat. White bubble-shaped scum started to appear on the surface with little burbling sounds, so I did my best to scoop it out. A deep pot was perfect for this. If you spend too much time scooping out the scum, it can burn at the bottom, so it's best to keep stirring all of it and raising or lowering the heat as necessary to avoid it boiling over. Well, keep the heat mostly on high. If you don't, it'll take a long time for it to boil down, and I find that the color is better if it doesn't take as long. Also, it's up to you whether you want to add lemon juice or not. If you want to keep the strawberry seeds, stir softly. If not, thoroughly mash the strawberries with a perforated spoon, making sure to keep stirring constantly to avoid burning them. Once tiny bubbles are rising to the surface and turning into bigger bubbles and the mixture looks glossy, it's done. Turn off the heat, then check how it's boiled down. You can do this by putting it in a small dish and allowing it to cool in order to see how soft it is, or you can put a small amount in a cold cup of water to see if it hardens. But if you want to check how it is when it's cold, it's best not to do this while it's still hot, though it all depends on how thick you want your jam to be. Finally, fill a sterilized jar almost to the top of the jam while it's still hot, then tightly fasten the lid before turning it upside down to let it cool. And done. It's quick, right? That's the jam made already. Like that, it should keep for around 3 months at room temperature, but if you want it to last longer, turn the jars right side up again and put them in a pan. Fill the pan up with water until the jars are completely covered, then apply heat. Once the water is boiling, turn the heat off and let it naturally cool down. And how strange, the jars are now vacuum sealed. Now they'll keep for a long time. While I was happily making jam, Dr. Daniel had arrived for a house call. I had been planning to give him some jam as a souvenir to take home, but it wasn't that simple. Because as he was examining me, he brought something up about that morning that should have been a secret. Someone saw me. Someone saw me. How embarrassing. Mark had watched me dance around while carrying the strawberries and then had seen me crouch down and nurse my ankle after I twisted it. Huh? Is there a footpath or something in the forest near the fields? Apparently, Mark often went out there to pick medicinal herbs in the mornings. I had no idea. Hey, Mark, you could have at least said something to me. Why did you go telling the doctor instead? The silver-haired doctor still treated me like a child, even though I told him I was 28. He patted my head again like he was saying, "What are we going to do with you?" Well, I know he's not looking down on me, and I know he's not shocked or anything. He definitely means well, but it still makes me cringe. I'm not used to being treated like your daughter or like anyone's daughter. I had lost my parents in a car accident right after my grandmother had passed away when I was in middle school. I did have an older brother, but we were far apart in age. He had lived in his own place and was mostly independent. Yeah, one of those guys. If he hadn't met my sister-in-law, he would no doubt still be single now. Dear sister-in-law, thank you for inflicting him with love. It had been a while since they got married, and they both seemed to still be madly in love the last time I'd seen them, so that was probably still the case. I hope so. It had been tough after my parents had died. Outside my grandmother, I hadn't been close to any of my relatives, so I'd had no one to rely on. I'd been able to get by for a while with the help of people in the neighborhood and teachers at school. It had probably been a good thing that my older brother had already been an adult by that point, because he graduated college that following year and returned to our hometown to work, and then things had finally settled down. We had needed to sell our single-family home, which had been very dear to me, and buy a snug apartment instead for a simple enough reason: snow shoveling. It took a lot of time and effort to maintain a detached house in Hokkaido, especially in the winter. I had been attending middle school in addition to doing the housekeeping, and my brother had had to do a lot of overtime as a new employee. So while it wasn't like it was a ridiculous amount of upkeep, both of us were too busy to stay on top of it. The road in front of our house was narrow, so the snowplows had rarely ever passed through it. I'd especially hated it when it snowed heavily. We ended up getting the neighbors to help, and using a huge shovel to move the snow. Shoveling snow until 8 at night, only for it to snow again just as hard overnight, had been a daily occurrence. I imagine that got frustrating. We'd had to look after the garden and the roof too. We tried our best, but rather than see our parents' beloved home fall into disrepair because of us, we had decided to move out when I graduated middle school. The apartments in our building were a little too small for families, and for that reason there had been a lot of elderly couples there who had moved for similar reasons. Snow is annoying. Plus, it's heavy. But at the apartment building, the owner of the property was in charge of shoveling snow, which meant that residents didn't need to do it. On top of that, the apartment had been built with reinforced concrete, so it was a lot warmer than the single-family home. There were no stairs, and the common area was free to use. The manager of the building had always been there and would look after the belongings of the residents while they were away, which was probably another reason why so many elderly people lived there. As a result, a young brother and sister who had lost their parents stood out, and our new neighbors had looked out for us a lot. Everyone had been really kind, or maybe they just had a lot of free time. They would stop us sometimes to offer pickled or boiled vegetables, which helped with meals. I had also amassed a large number of chirimen straps over time, a kind of Japanese traditional cloth woven into a strap used as a keychain. They were really cute, but eventually got to the point where I didn't know what to do with all of them. And then the elderly people we'd gotten to know had passed away one by one. It was unavoidable, but it was always sad. It can't be helped. If it bothers you that much, you shouldn't get to know them in the first place. I can still remember what my longtime boyfriend had said to me that time. It hadn't mattered whether his statement had been an attempt to console me, or an expression of his anger at me for being upset about something inevitable, or evidence of how indifferent he had been regarding interpersonal relationships. When I responded, yeah, I'd been able to feel a part of my heart breaking. It may have been natural, but that hadn't stopped it from being sad, and it hadn't changed how lonely I'd felt. I hadn't been looking for him to comfort me or anything. Anyway, I just wanted him to listen. We had somehow ended up dating for 6 years while never really figuring out these conflicting values. By the time I finished recalling my distant past, the medical examination had finished. After that, it was time for tea. The doctor talked about what had happened at the clinic that morning. Some children there had been rowdy as they waited for their mother to have a checkup. Mark was looking after them, but he's not very good at it. He's more helpful working with me as an assistant. Well, I guess that can't be helped, the doctor mused. I felt sorry for the children having to deal with Mark. I mean, he's fine with people in general, but he doesn't really wear his heart on his sleeve. Or maybe it's that he sets clear boundaries with people right away. Kids are sensitive to stuff like that. When I first met him, I felt like he was being very wary. Now that I'd seen him often, he wasn't like that anymore, or maybe he was just trying to emulate the doctor's behavior. But it also seemed like he had begun to warm up to people. I'm probably around 4 years older than him, but he's so... Well, putting that to the side, he doesn't seem the type to be willing to play with children. He was tall and had blonde hair and blue eyes. He looked like he could easily have been a prince, and he was very popular with the young women in the village. However, he himself didn't seem particularly delighted by the attention. He didn't take advantage of it at all, and mostly just acted like he wasn't interested. It seemed like he was already past his prime, even though he was younger than me. You're making me worry. Oh, does he bat for the other team? Oh, is he gay? I can understand her thinking that if he's not interested in ladies. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize. I'll make sure to ask him discreetly next time. I'm straight myself, but I'm very open-minded, so it's all good. I won't look at him differently or anything. I should have asked Yoko-chan about this. I really don't know a lot about it, or at least not enough to be able to give him any advice. But I'll definitely support him. I've got this. As I was daydreaming, the doctor made a joke about hiring a nanny. What? I interrupted the conversation, borrowing Lady Adelaide's hand to talk with. This world's culture and lifestyle were similar to Europe's a long time ago. Books were expensive. We couldn't waste paper for just anything, so I did most of my communication by borrowing someone's palm and writing on it with a finger. I wonder if you mean a small school building for children. We don't have anything like that, Lady Adelaide responded. I had thought as much, but I was still surprised there was no kindergarten or nursery school. Did your world have teachers instead of nannies? Dr. Daniel asked. The doctor is interested in that. Yeah, we did. Nursery school and kindergarten teachers were a little different from nannies, though. Actually, I've been licensed as a kindergarten teacher. It hadn't helped with my sales job. At all. As I wrote down my experience, the doctor looked deep in thought for a moment, then suggested the idea that I could go to the clinic once or twice a week, even if just for half the day, to look after the children there. I wonder if you could be of help with the mothers who visit with small children or the elderly, he mused. In short, I'd look after them while he examined their mothers, and knowing that they could go to the doctor and leave their children or elderly relatives with someone who could look after them would allow them to visit the clinic for regular checkups before they had any worrisome symptoms. I cannot talk. The people in the village know you're a spirit caller, and you went to the women's meeting before, right? You won't be able to communicate by writing with children who can't read, but you should be fine other than that, he continued. That's right, her wounds are already better, and if she starts going out more, I'll feel relieved knowing she's with you, Daniel, Lady Adelaide added. I'll make sure you receive a proper wage too, Dr. Daniel said with a playful look. If there's anything I can do to help, I'd like to do it anyway. He then said you should be fine. I was grateful he had faith in me. If I'd heard it from anybody else, I would just assume they were trying to butter me up, hoping to get closer to a caller. But I can trust Dr. Daniel. There are plenty of reasons why, but mainly it's because Lady Adelaide trusts him. How about it, Margaret? The doctor asked. And that's how it was decided. I'd make good use of my break between chores, and starting from next week, I will be looking after children at the clinic. After the doctor left, I was in the scullery doing some laundry when there was a knock at the door. Margaret, would you want to wear this when you go help out at the clinic? It's pretty hardy fabric, and any dirt won't really stand out, Lady Adelaide asked as she came into the room. She was holding a richly dyed dress. When I had a closer look at it, I saw that it was made from a woven fabric with a basic design. Around the collar and the hem was a delicate lace. The sleeves seemed easy to move around it, and when I tried it on, it fit perfectly. It suits me well if I do say so myself. Oh wow, wonderful. All right, you can have this then. But are you sure you don't want me to get you something newer, she asked. These clothes are quite old-fashioned. I like wearing them myself, but maybe you want something more modern? Lady Adelaide finally accepted that I really like a dress only after I reassured her multiple times. And to be honest, her clothes were cute. They used a lot of fabric without destroying the silhouette. And it didn't require a corset. The skirts were long but easy to move around in. Naturally, the clothes the women had in the village wore were different from Lady Adelaide's style and focused more attention on the waist and the chest. I guess if I were to talk about it like how they saw it, it was similar to the difference between wearing a kimono and modern clothes, but it wasn't exactly like that. After all, dresses are completely different. I think it's natural to go for the one you prefer, and I've heard that corsets are needed to wear more modern clothes, so I get it. We live in the countryside, so there weren't many fashionable people around, but apparently in the Royal Academy, there was an emphasis on fashion that Lady Adelaide wasn't too keen on. It seemed that Lady Adelaide had rarely agreed on clothes with her daughter-in-law. They're divorced, so her son's ex-wife. It's not that what I was saying was wrong, but I guess I shouldn't have taken an attitude with her, Lady Adelaide had once murmured sadly. She wasn't an unreasonable person, so I doubted clothes had been the only reason for their disagreement. Lady Adelaide had taken care of her own clothes when she was young. It was probably not that impressive feat for a noblewoman. But either way, I understood her completely. I'm approaching 30, and I already find myself not that attracted to new clothes, instead rotating through clothes that I already like, even if they're not the current trend. I know what this is. My old woman transformation is almost complete. That doesn't mean I'll accept it, though. I'll fight back. Lady Adelaide had given me her clothes without any hesitation. I was grateful I had some clothes here already, but I basically sewn or ordered them myself. Once I was completely recovered, it seemed I would have to go to the royal capital as a caller anyway, so I was hoping I could have a look at some fabric for more clothes while I was there. You could get to the royal capital and back from Missel in a day, so a lot of people went there to do their shopping, meaning that the products sold in Missel were more for everyday life. Well, I haven't really set out much, and we have people who deliver food and other items directly to the mansion. I never really had to go out and buy anything, so I hadn't seen for myself. I had gotten my information from the village women's meeting. Once I had been able to walk, I had attended the women's meeting. The news of a caller appearing hadn't yet been made official, but there were already rumors. Rather than hiding myself away, I had decided to go out in public, but I avoided causing any real commotion as per the doctor's advice. The village wasn't that large, so any unknown faces were bound to attract attention, which could lead to people making unfair assumptions about Lady Adelaide taking in someone whose origins were unknown. The doctor had gone ahead and told the village head and the villagers about me. It was probably a good idea that the doctor they trusted the most had been the one to tell them, so there hadn't been any weird rumors. The women at the meeting seemed a little perplexed by the caller's presence there. However, they were relieved to realize quickly that I was just a normal person. We chatted about makeup and hairstyles rather than anything heavier, which made it easy for everyone to feel comfortable talking to me. That's how I heard about which stores sold meat, vegetables, and other food in the village. It seemed that a lot of people baked their own sweets at home, so there weren't many bakeries or confectionaries. It all felt really old-fashioned, kind of like they were all Amish. I'd heard that there was a specialty sweet store in the royal capital that people went to if they wanted to give sweets as gifts. If any of your pain comes back, tell Daniel right away. Don't push yourself too hard, Lady Adelaide told me as she fixed my hair after I tried on the dress. I could see in her eyes that she was a little bit worried about me. She's way too kind. I hadn't had anyone worry about my well-being in a long time, so whenever she told me not to overdo it, I was so happy that I wanted to overdo it. When I had done that and given myself a fever, I had caused Lady Adelaide so much worry. Since coming here, I was starting to learn how to look after myself more. Thank you for everything, I thought. Then I nodded, my heart full of gratitude. Interlude. Daniel Reynolds. Missel was a countryside village of average size near the royal capital. Actually, it was up for debate whether it was technically a town or a village, but that didn't change the fact that it was in the countryside. In any case, it was a relaxed, traditional place with a large population of elderly people. I had quit working in the royal capital, citing my age as the reason. After moving here, it had taken a long time before I became familiar with the residents. I thought I would finally settle down in the remote countryside as the lone doctor in the region, but nobody could have predicted how life would turn out. It was early in the morning on a clear day. Surprisingly, we didn't have many patients, so my assistant Mark and I were taking advantage of the break to enjoy some tea together when a large dog I knew very well burst into the clinic. Okay, this is when they met Margaret, aka the main character. Oh, Buddy, I greeted the dog. What's happened? Calm down, boy. The usually obedient dog pulled on the hem of my white jacket with his teeth and desperately tried to tug me along. I gave him some water, restoring some calm to the clinic. Doctor, maybe something happened to Lady Adelaide, Mark suggested. Oh, I said, Mark, you're coming too. I wonder what's happened to Addie. I thought of my slightly younger childhood friend, trying to conceal my uneasiness and appear calm as I headed out. All sorts of horrible situations ran through my mind. Even though I told her to get a lodger, it would be my fault for not working harder to persuade her. As I pushed on ahead, I tried to convince myself that she had seemed fine when I'd seen her the other day. But the familiar road had never felt this long before. But what awaited me at the mansion wasn't a gravely injured Addie. It was a spirit caller with life-threatening injuries. You'll be going along to Lady Adelaide's today too, right? Mark said, seemingly reminded of it as I ate an early lunch. It had been 2 months since that day. The caller, whose name was Margaret, had now mostly recovered from her injuries. But I would still need to do regular house calls for the foreseeable future. As I explained that point, Mark waited like a child, eager to share his most precious secret. As soon as I stopped talking, he began to tell me about what had happened that morning. Oh, this is when he... Wryly as I listened. That girl again. I told her if she doesn't take it easy, her wounds won't heal. Once her wounds were fully healed, I would accompany her to the royal capital so she could have an audience at the royal palace. Before then, it was possible that someone would be dispatched here from the Magic Academy, but if possible, I would wanted her to recover from her wounds in Missel. I had read that transmigrating between worlds could place a heavy burden on the body, but it didn't seem her wounds had been caused by only that. I had broached the topic lightly, and she appeared to think that she had been involved in an accident and died as a result. In that case, her wounds would make sense. The fact that she had only suffered external wounds and that there had been no serious head trauma or internal damage was nothing short of a miracle. That, or the spirits had likely orchestrated it in some way. She seemed to have no attachment to her previous world, which could have been a result of her near-death experience. And at first, there had been many times when she'd appeared to be deep in thought, but lately I haven't seen her that way too often. I did think that if she had lost her memories, which had happened to other callers in the past, she would have been less sorrowful. Fortunately, she possessed a refined strength and was very adaptive. Since there was no way for us to send her home, I could only hope that she would continue to grow accustomed to life here. Is she really 28? Mark asked. She doesn't look at all older than me. It could be that their calendars are different, I posited. She might be quite young, though she did say she was a student until the age of 20 and had been working for 8 years after that, so I don't doubt that she's a mature adult. She can drink alcohol, too. She certainly can, Mark said with a laugh as he recalled the time where the four of us had eaten together the previous month. Margaret had gotten drunk off of one glass of what had been intended as an aperitif. She had remained in good spirits from beginning to end, happily singing a song, though no sound had come out, of course. Even a young adult who had just grown out of childhood would have been fine with that amount of alcohol. Still, the fact Mark was bringing her up again piqued my interest, and my gaze naturally slid over to look at his face. My pupil wasn't the type to show emotions easily, but recently, whenever the conversation had turned to Margaret, I had noticed him beginning to loosen up. I wondered if she had also noticed. Oh, is he starting to grow fond of her? That would be cute. It's impressive that she was in school until she was 20. Wouldn't that make her a scholar or a researcher? Mark asked. It appears that in her country, you aren't a full-fledged adult until the age of 20. It seems even commoners study up until the age of 22, while doctors and scholars study for even longer, I responded. This country had a high level of education compared to the surrounding countries, but even here, the highest level of education only went until the age of 18. Commoners usually began work at 13 or 14 years of age. I don't think I could become a doctor in Margaret's world, Mark admitted. I don't think I could either, I agreed. We laughed together as we finished eating. Not long after, a mother visited the clinic, her child in tow, thus starting the afternoon appointments. The mother was the patient. I asked Mark, who was exhausted from looking after the children, if he could take care of the clinic while I headed to Addie's. Mark wasn't the best at childcare, but he was capable when it came to medical examinations and treatments. The only reason he was still here as an assistant was because he had yet to report to the royal palace as an independent physician. He was skilled enough to go at any time, but it seemed he wanted to wait until he could use it as an opportunity to see what his parents were up to. He didn't have the best relationship with them. Oh. If nothing crazy came up while I was at Addie's, Mark would be fine on his own, and in fact, the many young women who had taken a fancy to him would probably crowd around him as patients. Mark could have done Margaret's house call and had a look at the condition of her injuries rather than me, but I had already said I would go to discuss the report to the royal palace. The reality was that I just wanted to see Margaret and spend time with Addie. Oh, are you fond of Addie in that way? I know they're childhood friends, but still. Back on that first day, once I had administered basic first aid, I had taken Margaret into the mansion where I had administered actual medical treatment using magic. Then, once I had finished treating her, we attempted to take the unconscious girl to the clinic. However, we had been stopped by Addie, who looked displeased. What are you doing? I'll look after her, she had said. She may be a caller, but we don't know what kind of person she is, I had responded. She might be dangerous. Having to nurse someone back to health is just going to be a burden, surely. She won't be a burden at all, and she's a girl. I don't care if you're taking her to a clinic or not. I won't let her be left in a place with only men. Ah. Addie had insisted, not to mention she's not a bad person. Our eyes met briefly, so I know. She had seemed just as stubborn this time as the time she'd said no to taking on a lodger in the past. After knowing her for as long as I had, I was certain there would be no way to change her mind. I made frequent house visits to keep a close eye on the situation, but it soon became clear that my fears were unfounded. Margaret was a gentle girl. She was sociable, easy to get along with, and she always greeted everyone with a smile. On the one hand, Margaret was incredibly open with both Addie and me. She wore her heart on her sleeve. It was possible that she would have been less forthcoming if she could talk, but even then, I don't think she'd be capable of hiding anything. I also felt bad for doubting her in the first place. As for Mark, he seemed to be waiting to see how it played out at first. If she had been an ordinary lady, maybe he would have found her attractive, but when I tried to push the topic with him, he just said, "She's probably popular, I can see why." And then acted like he wasn't that interested as he played with Buddy. Yeah, right, dude. Margaret didn't seem all that concerned with Mark's good looks or noble lineage, so I wondered if that was why he let his guard down. Wait, noble lineage? Is he royalty? Or is he just a noble? Okay, this could be interesting. If we find out that he's a freaking prince, I'm gonna laugh. Because her comment saying that he looks like a prince, that could actually be reality. Oh, this is gonna be good. So I wondered if that was why he let his guard down eventually. That, or he was drawn in by her childish, innocent smile that only Addie and I usually got to see. It was probably a mixture of both. At any rate, if my pupil had begun to show interest in someone, I would wholeheartedly support it. Margaret appeared to be a fully grown adult, but when we heard she was 28, we had to confirm it repeatedly to the point that she started to look confused. At that age, she would normally be married with 2 or 3 children, but she was single. It seemed such a scenario wasn't that rare in her world. Yeah. Yeah, we're not like old times where you had to be you were usually married by 18 or 20 and had kids by then. No, it's not like that anymore. She had long black hair that fell to her shoulders, and one dark brown eye and one light amber eye. She seemed very knowledgeable. I wondered if her eyes had changed colors when she had crossed worlds. Yep, from what we've seen, yep. She was often calm, but sometimes she did childish things, and she had a strange, incongruous air about her. Her vision wasn't that good, and whenever she needed to express herself, she needed a piece of paper or someone's palm to write on, which meant she had to be close to someone if she wanted to have a conversation with them. I had told her to be countless times to be careful about that when talking to men in the village so that they wouldn't fall in love with her. Oh dear, yeah. But I wasn't sure if she fully understood what I meant. Yeah, you might need to be a little more blunt on how you explain things like that. She was a stable person in some ways, but she also had a bit of a dangerous streak. She was generally good-natured and not the type to doubt people. I rarely ever saw anyone bold enough to cause trouble in the village, so it was mostly peaceful, but I would have to make sure to warn her sufficiently when we headed to the royal capital. Ever since Margaret had started living with Addie, Addie's expression had been getting gentler with each passing day. She was now as energetic as she had been back when she was still a young, unmarried lady. Margaret would be going to the royal palace as soon as her injuries were healed, but fortunately she had also asked for advice about how to stay with Addie for as long as possible. If I had to describe Addie's way of life in one word, that word would be old-fashioned. That's kind of technically 2 words, but whatever. Not only did she not use many magic tools, but she also did everything on her own, from cooking to cleaning and even yard work. While I had no idea how it usually was for countryside aristocrats, it did occur to me that it really wasn't really the sort of work that suited the wife of a count. Okay, so she's a countess. She's a countess, essentially. Sort of, by marriage. I was of the belief that her strong will and stubbornness had kept her in the capital where she didn't fit in at all until the death of her husband and then the marriage of her son. I knew her resistance to having any live-in servants was due to the less than peaceful life she had led at the Count's residence, so I was aware that I shouldn't belabor the issue. Addie led an inconvenient life, but surprisingly, Margaret enjoyed it. She had originally lived in a world without magic, so it seemed that magic and magical tools made her uneasy because they were unfamiliar to her. Yep, makes sense. She had been surrounded by all sorts of helpful items in her old world, and she'd once said that living with Addie was like going back in time 50 years, but even then she found it more comfortable than using magical tools. And she didn't have any problems doing odd jobs. She had gone on to say with a smile that in her old world she led a life ruled by her job, so now she wanted to experience a more hands-on way of life. It was harder to persuade Addie. An esteemed person whom the spirits had personally summoned to this world would absolutely have to go to the royal palace when her injuries had healed. It was for Margaret's benefit, but she didn't give in. She can go anywhere she wants, Addie had said. The royal palace will gladly take her in. She's still young, and it's probably a lot better for her there than here. I don't agree. That's just plain disrespectful to her, I had responded. Ever since Addie had found Margaret and started taking care of her, despite their inability to talk out loud together, it had felt like Addie was easing loneliness that she probably hadn't even realized she had. Thinking back to how she had been sold into the family of a count. So it wasn't a marriage of love, it was a political marriage. Okay, now I get it. And everything else up till now, there was no way I could relent this time. But, Addie, I see the two of you as parent and child. I can't believe it's only been a month. I truly believe the reason she appeared in your back garden was so that she could meet you. Daniel, don't worry, she seems happy here. In the end, it was Margaret's honest goodwill that had finally got Addie, who was reluctant until the last moment to agree to let her stay. When I arrived at the mansion, there was a sweet smell coming from the kitchen. Judging by the pleasant tanginess wafting through the air, I knew that Margaret had accomplished one of her long-term goals. I smiled as I knocked on the door. Hey, are you finally making strawberry jam? She said she'll share some with you when it's done. Lucky you, Daniel, Addie said. Watching them in their old-fashioned but stylish clothes, laughing together while they cooked, they looked like a picture book happy mother and daughter come to life. It was a scene I longed for myself, yet was unable to have. Oh, did you not find the one, dude? I felt somewhat wistful, my heart softening. Margaret had finished her first jars of jam. I called her over and spoke to her as I checked how she was healing. I'll help you with dance practice too, but I have to ask that you wait until your wounds have fully healed first, I told her with a smile after divulging that Mark had seen her dancing. Her eyes widened with shock. There was a little side path in the forest that you can't see from the field. Mark often takes it to gather medicinal herbs, I added. I've already got permission from Addie to use it. Margaret's face went red, and she smiled awkwardly. As I had thought, there was no way she could have hidden anything up her sleeve. She was innocent like a child, and I caught myself patting her on the head. Once I finished her checkup, I was handed some freshly baked bread and 2 jars of jam. Margaret held her index finger up to her elegant lips and winked as if to say, this is hush money to keep the dancing a secret. Now I'm torn about giving any of this to Mark. Yeah, because he was the one who told you. Do you think he deserves it? Oh, he'll try and get some if he knows that Margaret made it. Okay, oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. Interlude Mark Disraeli. Since birth, I'd never really been interested in anything. I was born as the illegitimate son to a count. Ah, okay. Now I get the whole issue with his parents thing. Yeah, I'm guessing his dad had an affair, or his mom had an affair. One of them had an affair. And now there's tension between him and his parents. So it wasn't the most pleasant upbringing. I was raised away from the mansion, hated by the... Okay, it's his dad that did it. Okay. By the Count's wife and children, and forced to watch as my mother was manipulated by a man she couldn't even call her husband. I guess the only blessing was that I never had to worry about finances. My activities were restricted, though not to the extent of my half-siblings. Okay, so his dad was the one that had the affair, okay. The only time I was really free was when I was reading, so as a result I ended up reading every book in our mansion, but even then, nothing piqued my interest. I just continued to read as a temporary escape from the people who controlled me. As time went on, differences appeared between me and my half-siblings, particularly when it came to our academics and our looks. It didn't make them very happy, so they began lobbying undue criticism my way. When I didn't respond to their childish attacks, they began to escalate. I probably should have responded in some way, but I figured that if I made them realize it was pointless to pick on me, they would leave me alone. That backfired. Great. It was about 6 months before graduation. Regardless of whether I was to enter a research facility or prepare for a position in Parliament, I had no interest in my future. I took a very laissez-faire approach to how I spent my days. And while there was discord between me and my half-siblings, I never imagined they would make an attempt on my life. Oh... Dude, your family situation is fucked up. Then again, he didn't have a choice in it. I escaped down a back alley in the royal capital, clutching my abdomen as I hid in a secluded corner. I had just been stabbed by a man I assumed my half-siblings had hired to kill me. Oh, what are you doing here in a place like this? Surely this isn't the best day for a game of hide-and-seek, is it? Startled by the sudden voice, I turned around to face a tall, slender man. He was well-dressed, but I was unable to see his face under the shadow of his hat. A heavy mixture of sleet and rain was coming down, so he was certainly right that it wasn't the time or most ideal weather for playing outside. However, it was a little difficult to determine why this middle-aged man had called out to me at all, especially given that he seemingly had his own reasons for being out in the weather. I had managed to successfully defend myself, so the wound wasn't that deep, but it would be a problem if he realized I was gushing blood. I could still hear the voices of my pursuers ringing in my ears. I had no time to be getting involved with this man. If you don't want to be involved, leave. I urged him in a halting voice. I wish I could do that, but you see, I'm a doctor. I can't just ignore an injured person, the man replied. Hey, what are you... Contrary to his laid-back tone, he deftly held me down on the ground, and I felt the sensation of healing magic pouring into my wound. It seemed he had used a large quantity of magic, but I was starting to get dizzy from the pain. All right, I've gotten the wound under control. Now I think I'll sit with you a bit longer, the middle-aged man said kindly. I felt my consciousness slowly fading to darkness and calmly thought to myself, I wonder if he's working for them too. Yeah, why would he be working with the people who attacked you? He just used healing magic on you. Why would he heal you up if he was working with the enemy? You know? I woke up in a simple and clean bed. There was a window... window nearby, and I could also see 3 other beds that were all covered in modesty curtains hanging from the ceiling. There seemed to be other people behind the curtains. My head still felt cloudy, but I could hear their voices one after another. Hurts and here also hurt. Okay. Yeah, that's just the season for you. There's a lot of that, especially rain. It's just an intense pain. I can't handle it. I must be in a medical clinic. The voices of older women complaining about hip pain continued, followed by a calm male voice comforting them. Then there were patients with stomach pains, sprains, children with fevers. There was no end to it. The clinic was busy. The man with the calming voice, who appeared to be the doctor, was quelling everyone's concerns before sending them home. I started dozing off, listening to the voices like they were lullabies. Oh, how are you feeling? Is your head feeling any better? A voice called out to me. Before I knew it, all the other patients had left. It was raining outside, so it was difficult to tell what time of day it was. But judging by how dark the room was, I suspected it was evening. The light at the back of the examination room was shining from behind the doctor, making it difficult for me to see his expression. You don't have to get up, he said. Your wound closed up, but it's not completely healed. You're young and energetic, though, so if you just stay lying down until morning, you should be able to move again. For now, you should sleep. We'll talk later. Then he patted me on the head like I was a child and added, Your pursuers won't follow you here, so sleep well and recover before leaving the room again. How many years has it been since someone patted me on the head like that? Can I trust him? I was suspicious, but as I watched the curtain rustle slightly in the doctor's wake, I wondered why I felt oddly at ease. Then I closed my eyes again. The man introduced himself as Daniel Reynolds. He was a doctor who worked here in Missel, a village not far from the royal capital. I recognized his name. Weren't you the head doctor at the royal palace, I started. It was Dr. Daniel. I'm retired, he responded. It almost sounded like he was trying to hide who he was, but I was just surprised to find myself in front of a doctor whose name every noble knew. I found it hard to believe that there weren't many people who knew how much magic they would need to administer to a wound just from looking at it. I was confident this was the man himself. He said he had been heading to the library to return a book, but came across an old bookstore on the way, and as he had gone to stop by it on his way back home, he had found me in that back alley. I've always been good at finding children who are hiding away, he added nonchalantly. At that point, I finally lowered my guard and told him everything that had happened, perhaps due to his name or just his general presence, but I wasn't being naive. He really seemed like he would be understanding, like he wouldn't deny or refuse me in any way. He seemed open-minded, and that was probably the word I was looking for. I see, I have heard a bit about the prestigious Disraeli family. You're the accomplished son everyone's talking about, I see. So, Mark, what do you want to do? Dr. Daniel asked. What do you mean? I responded. Do you want to take down your siblings and fulfill your destiny as the Count's heir, or do you want to choose another path? Do you want to get revenge, or do you want to keep running away? I hadn't thought about any of those choices. I did find it annoying that my siblings had gotten me like that, but that was the extent of it. I felt no emotions in general. I just lived day to day. I was only still alive because I hadn't died. I had no plans to die, nor did I have any plans to live and actually do something. Dr. Daniel probably saw right through me. He chuckled as he handed me another cup of warm tea. You need time. As for your wound, well, it's mostly healed by now, but it's probably best that you stay here a little longer anyway. It might help you decide what you want to do, he said. You're just letting me stay here? You'll have work to pay for your treatment, he teased lightly. I would never be able to afford the fees just by working here a little. You have enough credits to graduate, right? He continued. I know a few of the lecturers at the academy, so I'll speak to them. For now, focus on getting better. You probably already noticed, but that blade was laced with poison. You're lucky you didn't die on the spot. I guess even their attempts at poisoning me ended in vain, I said dryly, making more of a statement than anything. While I was actually thinking that was something you should be mad about. Let me know what you think of that, because I don't even get it. Yeah, I don't understand why he frowned with such a troubled look on his face. I was introduced to patients as a student assistant to Dr. Daniel had brought back from the Railway capital. Country life was peaceful. Throughout the afternoon, I would assist the doctor by following his instructions, and at night I would borrow something from his personal library to read. Learning about the healing arts was actually interesting. It was the first time I'd ever had fun learning something, and it surprised me. As time went on, I had all sorts of questions. I often wondered if the lack of patience had something to do with the peaceful villagers just not getting badly hurt. I couldn't help wondering why he only had patients who didn't make full use of his skills. As the former head doctor of the royal palace, he could have made so much money working with nobles, but had chosen instead to work in a small village where he barely made a profit. Why did he help me in the first place? He had said himself that he couldn't just ignore a wounded person, but he could easily have sent me home after treating me, and that would have been the end of it. Why had he taken me in instead? There was a lot I didn't know about Dr. Daniel. Daniel, long time no see, my friend. Ah, that must be your new assistant. It's nice to meet you, the elegant woman said by way of greeting. She seemed to be around the same age as Dr. Daniel. I was making a house call and been taken to a lord's mansion that stood in front of a forest. A large dog named Buddy and the widow of a late Count, Adelaide Dustin, lived there together. Addie, how are things? Dr. Daniel asked. This is Mark Disraeli. I brought him from the royal capital. We were both aware of the meaning behind one another's family names, but we didn't broach the topic as Lady Adelaide went about preparing some afternoon tea. Even though we were supposed to be there for a house call, her response to his remark about me was a casual, "Oh, you picked up a fine edition from the capital." There were no servants at the mansion. Laid out on the table before us was a variety of pastries that Lady Adelaide had baked herself, as well as a fragrant tea that she had poured for us. Seeing my boss relax into the sofa, I realized this must have been a common occurrence. Lady Adelaide's clothes and lifestyle didn't seem modern. They felt outdated, but it was also as if time itself had stopped here, as she just happened to be someone from the time when it had stopped. No doubt Lady Adelaide and Dr. Daniel had known each other for a long time and met to drink tea regularly under the guise of a house call. After we spent a relaxing afternoon together, we left the mansion without any mention of a next time, but it was obvious that there would be a next time without having to explicitly say it. We headed back toward the clinic. The evening sky looked like it was smoldering as the sun set. "You're in this village because of her, aren't you?" I asked Dr. Daniel. "Yep." I had a feeling that might be the case. "That's right, she's important to me." I was startled by how blunt Dr. Daniel was. He suddenly stopped, then looked directly at me. "Mark, lofty titles and wealth are meaningless if you don't have them when it counts," he said sadly. "Savor. The reality of that will never go away, no matter what I accomplished after the fact." Where did that come from, I thought to myself. After a moment's pause, I realized that he had once spoken about this when we had first met, but it had never come up since. If there are things you can obtain and achieve now, then it's best you do. One day that'll save you. When you have something that you want to protect, what you have built up will help you. "I don't have anything I want to protect," I responded. "You don't know what the future holds." He said it like he was joking, but the expression on his face was tense. "For now, you should start with accepting the goodwill people have toward you. I'm not saying you have to fall in love with someone. You don't have to return goodwill either. For now, just accept their words and their feelings. Eventually, you'll remember that you're human. You are only human after all, Mark," he continued. "If you don't see yourself as a human being, they won't either. That's why they thought they could kill you so easily. Of course they're the ones who are in the wrong." Those words struck me in the heart as we stood under the sky that the setting sun had dyed shades of red and orange, and I never let them go. I ended up spending 4 months in Missel. After I returned to the royal capital and graduated from the academy, Dr. Daniel arranged for me to attend the royal clinic, where I learned the basics of the healing arts. Once I entered the royal clinic, the squabble over who would be heir was momentarily on pause, and now that I had the Daniel Reynolds supporting me, the attempts on my life stopped too. Thank God. During my time at the royal clinic, I gained a great deal of knowledge and skills, and while I couldn't call them friends, I made a few acquaintances too. Afterward, I returned to Missel. "I didn't ask for you. I thought I'd invite myself here as your assistant," I said with a smirk. "You're a funny one, aren't you?" the familiar doctor said as he once again took me in. I decided I would rather spend my days with this person than with my biological parents. Yeah, considering what has happened, I don't blame you. "I'll look after you until you breathe your last," I continued with a haughty laugh. "Here's me finding that kind of attitude nostalgic. I really lost it," Daniel said. I had been laughing, but the way Dr. Daniel glared at me made me stop and bow deeply instead. Just like that, time passed, bringing me to the present. After breakfast, but before the clinic opened, I headed to the forest to pick up some herbs to last us the next few days. The healing arts worked well on external wounds, but for internal wounds, additional medicine was necessary. We had some herbs growing at the clinic, but a wide variety of medicinal herbs grew in the forest on the property belonging to the Countess, and the doctor and I had permission to harvest them. I harvested the herbs in front of me, and then as I headed down a small pathway behind the mansion's back garden, I heard Buddy barking happily. When I looked over in the direction of the barks, I saw Margaret with a wooden basket in her hand, twirling around as she gathered strawberries, with her long black hair swaying in the wind and her skirt fluttering around her. It seemed like the sun was only shining on her, illuminating everything in her immediate vicinity. I felt like I could almost hear a song playing faintly on the wind. Oh, he's fallen in love! I had paused to watch her when she suddenly crouched down and grabbed her ankle. That's right. If Dr. Daniel hadn't been the one to heal her wound, she still wouldn't be able to walk without crutches. Dang it. I remember the day she had first arrived. She had been lying sideways on the ground in on the grass in this very garden. She was badly wounded, like she had fallen from a high place or had been hit by a horse carriage. It was a miracle she was even still breathing. When we saw her strange clothing and exposed leg wound, the doctor and I were speechless. This is bad, the doctor mumbled to himself as he asked Lady Adelaide, who had lost all the color to her face, to go fetch some water and blankets. First of all, we need to at least make it so we can move her. Huh? It can't be. Dr. Daniel talked as he worked. Before he could take care of her wounds, he did a full examination, and I could tell he was reasonably shaken. What's wrong? I asked. She has no magical ability. At first I didn't understand what he had said. That simply couldn't be. She was currently breathing, albeit very shallowly, and she had a pulse. She was still alive, even though she had no magical ability. I guess magic is something that keeps you alive in this world? Shocked, I also used the magic to check her, but it seemed she really didn't have any magical ability. How could that be? Addie said she just appeared here, right? Asked Dr. Daniel. Yeah, that Buddy found her lying here unconscious. The doctor, who had been restlessly attending to the woman, stopped suddenly. Could she possibly be a person who had appeared out of nowhere? She didn't look like she was from our country, but she was wearing clothes that didn't seem to be from any surrounding country either. She had no magical ability, even though absolutely every living thing in the world did. The only possible answer was a spirit caller, Dr. Daniel and I said in unison. I still remember the commotion it had caused the last time a spirit had appeared in the royal forest. Mark, I'll leave her upper body to you. It seems like she landed on her back, so you'll have to act as a temporary support when we move her carefully and slowly, the doctor ordered. I'll examine her leg. Okay, I responded. She was covered in serious injuries, but her left leg and foot were the most severely wounded. It looked like she had been crushed by a large rock or something. Yeah, that was from the accident. There was a large open gash where her broken bone and damaged tendons were visible. The only saving grace was that there wasn't a lot of blood. I wonder if I can even close the wound. Hinting that she may be left unable to walk permanently, the doctor continued to pour healing magic into the injured leg. The woman was still on her side. Her eyes remained closed as her face contorted in pain. A chill ran down my spine as I looked at her pale cheeks. A spirit caller was someone who had great influence, not only over the country, but over the entire continent. They were incredibly important. If this woman really was No, she was. I knew it deep down. But even though her very existence was fantastical like this, she was just another patient. We would have to do everything we could to save her. I administered treatment following the doctor's orders. When I had finished, I looked up at him. Sweat was beading on his forehead and his brows were knitted in consternation. Once he finished treating her, he placed his finger on her leg. Great work as always, I said. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have made it. Although her injuries were still serious, Dr. Daniel had performed an almost perfect procedure to the extent that you would never even think he was only stabilizing her condition. Her broken bone had even been set, which would have never been possible for another doctor. However, Dr. Daniel still didn't seem pleased. This isn't just my work, he said. It felt like there was a different, bigger power helping me. Before I could ask what he meant by that, I saw Lady Adelaide rushing over with blankets and water from the direction of the mansion. Okay, we're going to have to end that off here. I'll see you guys in the next one.